Growing up in rural Mississippi, the idea of monsters in the woods always just seemed like a distant, fantastical concept to me. And the small town I lived in, with a mere 250 people, was as mundane and slow paced as they come. Everybody knew everybody, and life just seemed to follow a very predictable rhythm. But it wasn't until I was about 18 when a seemingly harmless game with a Ouija board would turn my worldview upside down, setting the stage for a series of events that would change my perspective permanently. Now, back in those days, I had a group of friends who enjoyed dabbling into things like that. You know, the occult, or even looking through an old black magic spellbook, and, of course, Ouija boards. Now, little did I know that this seemingly innocuous foray into the realm of spirits would open my eyes. Now, as I settled into my newfound beliefs, I began taking notice of strange occurrences that seemed to take place in my own rural town. Animals were known to be mysteriously slaughtered or gone missing, and it could have been convenient to chalk it up to the work of coyotes or even other predatory animals. There was always just this unsettling undercurrent, a feeling that perhaps something else was responsible. Now, as a way to escape the stresses of small-town life and to connect more with nature, I developed a passion for hunting growing up. And it didn't take long before the woods became my sanctuary, one of the only places where I felt at peace because home life just wasn't so great. Now, being outdoors was cathartic for me, allowing me to clear my mind at very stressful bad times and reconnect with the simpler, more predictable aspects of life. I would spend countless hours in the wilderness, armed with my trusted bow, a fully decked out Matthews Creed. I felt like I knew the woods surrounding my town like the back of my hand after a few years and spending so many hours in them. That was until an early morning when my hunting had led me to a confrontation with the unknown, something that would prove that there were indeed things that I didn't understand. Now, it was the weekend, and as was the custom, I had planned to go out hunting early that morning. The familiar buzz of excitement filled me with anticipation. That very night, I was checking my gear meticulously, ensuring that my bow was properly strung, my arrows were sharpened to perfection. I had no idea what was about to happen. I set the alarm for 5, and I awoke to the shrill beep of my beside clock, reminding me that there was time for yet another rewarding day. But I decided to get up and pursue it. Stepping outside, the chill in the air greeted me, marking a fresh start to the day. I quickly dressed for the brisk morning weather, grabbing my bow and gear and setting off for the woods, eager to relish the solitude and tranquility that they offered. Now, the path to my favorite hunting stand was pretty well trodden and familiar. I would move deeper, and the sounds of early morning songbirds would keep me company. Each step took me further away from civilization and deeper into the embrace of the wilderness. The sky was still a dark tapestry of shadow and slumber. The sun had yet to make its appearance. My mind was quiet, meditative state as I walked, only to be interrupted by the occasional snapping twigs underneath my feet. I mentally reviewed my plan for the day, reaching my hunting stand, settling in, and waiting patiently for the deer that frequented the area. The time seemed to be suspended in those early morning hours. But it was okay, because I was in no hurry. So as I approached my stand, I nestled deep in a remote part of the woods, and I couldn't help but feel an immense sense of satisfaction. After all, I had thoroughly scouted the area, put in the time and effort to set up the stand, and was now on the verge of being rewarded with the experience of hunting, something I loved. It was a ritual that grounded me and brought me perspective. Now, to my delight, the wind direction was in my favor, gently sweeping my scent away from where I expected the deer to appear. Being cautious, I knew that even the subtlest of details could mean the difference between success and an empty-handed walk back to civilization. With every variable seemingly in place for a successful day, I felt the urge of anticipation that would soon be on me. Now, as I continued making my way, dawn began to break ever so slowly. The first bits of light chasing away what darkness was left, and the morning air was filled with the sounds of the forest waking up, gradually increasing in both volume and variety. I felt like I was in a concert, put on by nature itself. But suddenly, nature's concert came to an abrupt halt. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on the woods themselves. The morning calls of the birds ceased without warning, and the once vibrant forest atmosphere was replaced by an oppressive silence that felt heavy and foreboding. The abrupt change left me with a deep sense of unease, my instincts immediately kicking in to warn me that something was very, very wrong. In the world of hunting in the outdoors, sudden silence is often a harbinger of danger, typically signaling the presence of a predator or some other threat. My mind began racing through the possibilities, considering what could be nearby to trigger such a reaction from the forest inhabitants. Bears and big cats, ever-present dangers in the area, became the leading candidates, filling me with dread as I contemplated an encounter with such a thing. I wasn't ready for a mama bear and her cubs, nor was I ready for a run-in with a cougar, and each step I took now felt heavier, as if I was dragging some invisible weight along with me. My heart pounding in my chest, its once steady rhythm now a frenzied tempo that matched the anxiety that was coursing through my very veins. My senses were heightened, and every fiber of my being on high alert for any sign of movement, any hint of what could have silenced the forest around me. But the further I pressed on, the more deafening the silence became. It was an all-encompassing blanket of quiet that unified the entire woods, amplifying my unease and amplifying even the smallest and most innocuous of sounds. Being alone in the midst of such uncertainty and invisible peril made me feel very vulnerable. Despite this growing trepidation in my gut, I forced myself to press forward, knowing that my hunting stand was my best chance at safety. I'd invested too much time and effort in putting it together, and it offered a relatively secure vantage point from which to observe and confront whatever it was that had stilled the forest so unexpectedly. Now, as I inched my way closer, every step felt like it was taken with deliberate care. I gripped my bow tightly, preparing myself mentally for the unknown. There was just this nagging sense of dread that was threatening to overwhelm me. And it was in these moments that the heart of this silence that I would encounter something beyond my wildest imaginations. Through sheer force of will, and despite the oppressive silence around, I managed to keep moving towards my hunting stand. Each painstaking step seemed to take an eternity, my eyes scanning the darkened woods around me for any signs of danger. I remained acutely aware of the fact that I was the potential prey in an environment where predators rule. The thought only intensified my determination to reach the safety of the stand and put some distance between myself and whatever had silenced the once vibrant forest. But as I drew nearer to the stand, I tried to put my anxiety aside and focus on the task at hand, which was climbing up into the tree and securing myself. Adrenaline was still surging through my veins, and I knew that panicking was the last thing I needed to do. So as I arrived at the base of the sturdy pine that would hold my hunting stand, I noticed that I was unconsciously holding my breath, as if trying to blend in with the eerie silence enveloping me. And slowly I began to climb, taking care not to make a sound. Each movement was calculated and careful, the stakes feeling impossibly high. I tried to steady my breath and focus on the task, silently reminding myself that I knew these woods inside and out. My life had already been intertwined with this specific landscape, and I could not let my fear consume me. Once I clambered into the safety of my stand, its familiar confines offering some small solace from the unnerving stillness that surrounded me. And in those moments, the narrow wooden platform had never felt more significant, acting as a beacon of safety in a world that had turned inexplicably hostile. I took stock of my surroundings, searching for any signs of life or movement. With hunting instinct taking over, I retrieved my knife from my belt, keeping it close just in case I needed quick access to my only means of close self-defense. And as the minutes ticked by, the endless silence only grew more suffocating. The sun really began to rise, casting the forest in an almost ethereal glow, a light that seemed at odds with the darkness that invaded the woods. Sitting there, knife and bow at the ready, I strained my ears for any sounds that might break the unnerving quiet, desperately seeking any indication of what had forced the forest into a state of paralysis. Now, unbeknownst to me, it was at that moment that my world was about to collide with something unlike anything I had ever encountered before. A creature that defied all logic and reason. My journey into the heart of the unknown had only just begun. As I perched high in the stand, my senses would remain on high alert, my heart pounding. Now the silence would force me into a heightened state of vigilance, compensating for the lack of audible cues by focusing intently on any visual disturbances in the woods around me. And despite this constant vigilance, I still felt utterly unprepared for what was about to happen. As dawn continued to break, washing the forest in golden hues, something large and fast-moving was approaching, and I knew in an instant that this was the cause of the unnatural silence. It was as if all my worst fears converged to form a monolithic force barreling straight at me. Instinctively, I raised my bow, preparing to defend myself from whatever was careening through the woods. Now, the sight that met my eyes was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. A being of incredible size and speed, humanoid, yet animal-like in proportion, would burst into view. Its muscular form resembled the werewolves of myth and movies, bearing a striking similarity to the creatures depicted in the film Dog Soldiers. The sight of it alone sent a shiver of fear down my entire being, searing the image of this creature into my memory forever. As the reality of this thing's existence took root in my mind, I fought to maintain my composure. It quickly hurried down the incline, through the shallow creek below, disappearing on the opposite slope, all in a matter of 5 to 7 seconds. Its agility and swiftness were unnerving, as was its sheer size, which, if I have to estimate, it was somewhere between 6'5" and 7'5", and probably weighed around 250 pounds. I mean, it had rippling muscles, and you could see it very clearly between its dark fur. Throughout the encounter, it seemed wholly uninterested in me, and focused solely on the unseen goal that lay ahead of it. Even as it tore through the woods, grace met primal strength in its lithe form, leaving me astonished, yet awestruck. Now, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished like a wisp of smoke on a summer's day. The only trace of its presence was the chill it left in the air and the lingering scent of blood and wet dog. In the moments following the retreat, time seemed to freeze entirely. My heart was beating so loudly, I thought it was going to alert this thing. Now, my hands were tightly gripping my bow. It felt like the only anchor keeping me grounded in this surreal moment. I tried to regain control of my breathing, fighting my best to come to terms with the fact that I had just seen and experienced something that by all logic, by all science, by all of society, should not exist. The weight of this revelation hung heavy on my shoulders. The safety of the hunting stand no longer a refuge against the unknown that lurked in these woods. Now, in that instant, my perspective was forever broadened. My views on the undefined and mysterious forever altered. The creature that had sprinted through the woods that morning would forever take over my dreams and would reshape the way I saw the world. As the sun was continuing its very slow ascent, it's like all the noises around me started to come back and build once more. The natural world tentatively adjusting to the absence of the creature that had silenced it only moments prior. But even as life began to return, I remained tethered to the sturdy hunting stand, trying to reconcile the fact that what my senses had experienced seemed to defy all conventional explanation. Now that day, although the hunting stand had been the destination driving me onward in the face of overwhelming fear, I made the decision to abandon my mission. With renewed caution and lingering trepidation, I quickly descended from the stand, each step bringing me closer to the ground and to confronting the reality that I had just borne witness to. I knew that I could not simply suppress the memory of those few heart-pounding minutes. It was an event destined to leave an undeniable mark on my soul. Now, as I made my way back through the now awakened woods, I retraced my earlier steps, the weight of the experience still fresh in my mind. Now, even though I was able to return to my town, I was keeping the tale to myself. I knew that sharing my experience would likely be met with skepticism, disbelief, and ridicule. And so for the longest time, I held this in the back of my mind. Even now, I still have a really hard time talking about it. The Loch Ness Monster, known to many of you as Nessie, has captured the world's imaginations since its sudden rise to fame in 1933. Countless individuals claim to have witnessed the mysterious, long-necked, humped creature, with some even producing photographs and videos as evidence. Now, since then, the shores of Loch Ness, a staggering 22.5 miles long and roughly around 744 feet deep, have become a magnet for millions seeking a glimpse of this strange, elusive creature. Adventurers have employed sonar equipment, aircraft, balloons, and submarines all on their quest to unveil the secrets of Loch Ness. And numerous theories have also emerged, attempting to explain the true nature of this creature. Many are captivated by the idea that these creatures are the last surviving plesiosaurs, an ancient species of marine reptile believed to have gone extinct millions and millions of years ago. This theory in particular is popular among the Scottish Tourist Board filmmakers and the general public. Others propose the existence of Nessie could be attributed to giant salamanders or perhaps colossal eels. Additional explanations featuring sturgeon, oversized turtles, catfish, crocodiles, giant frogs, and even hippopotami have surfaced. Now, intriguingly, some have even ventured to suggest that the Loch Ness Monster could represent extraterrestrial beings visiting our planet, especially as Loch Ness has experienced a considerable amount of documented UFO activity. Enter the realm of the classic British sci-fi TV series Doctor Who. Airing from August 30th to September 20th, 1975, the BBC released a captivating 4-part story titled Terror of the Zygons. Now, this serial encountered the Loch Ness Monster with a twist unexpected by viewers. Embodying a similar vein as the 1970 movie The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, the creature featured in Terror of the Zygons was not an organic beast, but a carefully camouflaged advanced piece of machinery. In both instances, the monster-like machines were none other than submarines, one disguised as Nessie, and the other as the antagonist pitted against the world's most famous fictional time traveler, Doctor Who. Now, the plot of Terror of the Zygons unraveled as the story of a particular alien race, the Zygons, sought refuge on Earth after their homeworld was annihilated by solar flares. Now, stranded and desperate for a new home, they chose Earth as their target location. Unfortunately, for one lone group of Zygons who had managed to reach our planet, they particularly crash-landed in Loch Ness. Here, they plotted and schemed under the waves for years and years, awaiting the day they could finally emerge and claim Earth as their new home. Now, as the mystery of it stretches across time and imaginations, Terror of the Zygons remains an example of how such legends seamlessly merge with fiction. Even so, it does make us wonder how often fact and fiction marry, especially without us knowing, forming extraordinary and surreal occurrences. For instance, in 1971, Sweden's Jan-Ove Sundberg, who was 23 at the time, stumbled upon a landed UFO with its unearthly crew during a visit to Foyers Bay, Loch Ness. Although a purely fictional explanation, Terror of the Zygons sparks our curiosity and invites us to ponder the mysteries of the Loch Ness Monster further. As remarkable events unfold and mysterious sightings continue to emerge from the very depths of this lake, we're left to wonder the truth about this. From ancient marine reptiles to alien life forms, the countless theories and beliefs do persist. Now, going back to the craft for a moment, it was quite unusual. About 30 feet long, dark gray, cigar-shaped, with a large handle-like section on top. It resembled a giant iron used for smoothing clothing. Now, Sundberg's surprise turned to worry when he saw there were 3 humanoid figures emerging from the trees, all wearing outfits similar to divers. Now, initially, he thought they were divers searching for the Loch Ness Monster. However, when the figures entered the peculiar craft through a panel and it ascended to 60 feet before moving horizontally towards Loch Moor, Sundberg realized they were not divers. Ted Holliday, a Nessie researcher and author, commented on the Sundberg incident, noting the irony in the lack of photographic evidence from someone witnessing such an extraordinary event at Loch Ness. This pattern seemed typical, as Nessies often appear to have a negative effect on photographs. Sundberg attributed his inability to capture the event on camera to a feeling of paralysis that came over him. Sundberg managed to capture only 1 photo, which researcher Stuart Campbell believed showed nothing extraordinary. In fact, Campbell thought Sundberg's sighting was possibly a bizarre hallucination, and as a result, we must exercise caution when considering this case. Interestingly, upon returning to Sweden, Sundberg claimed he was threatened by men in black, faced supernatural events like poltergeist activity, and received strange, threatening phone calls. 3 years later, Ted Holliday also encountered a paranormal MIB experience at, guess where, Loch Ness. Now, Sundberg's alleged inability to take close-up photos of the craft and crew is a reoccurring issue among Nessie seekers. As pointed out by Colin and Janet Board, they reference Hugh Gray's 1933 Loch Ness Monster photo, where 4 out of 5 shots turned out blank. Now, this suggests a possible force present in and around Loch Ness, and it hinders people from uncovering the truth in a seemingly manipulative and potentially harmful manner. On the morning of 1974, Nessie hunter Ted Holliday decided to stroll near the Loch Ness himself. Now, this turned out to not be a good choice, because as Holliday walked, he noticed a man approximately 90 feet away standing on a slope leading to the loch. This figure was anything but ordinary, dressed completely in black and perhaps not even human. Now, you see, unlike most Loch Ness visitors who search the water for a monster, this mysterious figure faced away from it, gazing intently at Holliday. He later shared that he felt an overwhelming sense of malevolence from the figure. Now, the figure donned what seemed to be a black plastic piece of clothing, black gloves, and a helmet resembling a motorcycle one. Goggles concealed his eyes, and a black cloth covered his nose and mouth. Holliday cautiously approached the man. However, even up close, the man neither moved nor acknowledged Holliday. Most disturbing was the apparent lack of eyes behind the goggles. Shocked, Holliday walked about 10 feet before stopping, and Holliday quickly devised a plan to pretend to fall on the grass and grasp the man for support, intending to determine if he was a tangible being or an intangible phantom. However, He was stopped when whistling sounds and indistinct whispers filled the air, causing the man in black to vanish without a trace. Now, trembling in fear, Holiday examined the empty road and realized there was no way the man could have escaped in a typical manner. Although he tried to dismiss the incident as a strange illusion, deep down he knew this explanation was unrealistic. To distract himself, Holiday visited the Carey family, bidding farewell to Reverend Omand. Unfortunately, he couldn't shake the eerie presence of the MIB. Now, in September of 1866, a very similar sighting was actually reported on the hills right around there, where a somber man dressed in black was seen strapped to the back of a large, menacing dog. A frightened farmer spotted them and hurriedly retreated to his home, fearing he might become the hound's next target. Ted Holliday's investigation into the Loch Ness Monster and his encounter with the MIB took a sinister turn when 1 year later in 1974, his search had been abruptly halted by a severe heart attack. And guess what? It occurred at the exact spot where the MIB had appeared and disappeared the previous year. You can call me Devin for the sake of this. I'm about to blow the whistle on some pretty major things here, but I'm going to do this over the course of several emails. Now, I've spent decades working in the shadows of the government, but recent world events have forced me to reconsider my silence. A wave of high-ranking officials have already begun to acknowledge their knowledge of UFOs and extraterrestrial life, and so I've decided to share my own story as well. For me, it all started back in the early 1980s. I was working at a law firm co-owned by John S. Harrington, who would later go on to serve in President Reagan's administration. Now, Harrington was a respected lawyer, but it was during this time in the White House that everything changed. John confided in me some information that left him emotionally distraught for several weeks. He revealed to me the existence of extraterrestrial life on Earth, including DUMBs, which are deep underground military bases run by aliens. It wasn't just a one-off story, though. He consistently spoke of it, saying that it was only the tip of the iceberg. Now, Harrington's disclosure was shocking, but the flood of government officials coming forward to share their own experiences with not just UFOs, but alien life has made me feel a responsibility to bring this matter into the open. Now, the recent establishment of the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, seems to have opened the doors for much more credible accounts to come forward. These are not merely one-off accounts. Harrington shared with me how the knowledge he received on this matter caused him to cry himself to sleep for a number of nights. The thought of a world where his children could grow up under the control of aliens was too much for him to bear. Now, at 83, John Harrington remains quiet on the subject, just as I did for many, many years. But as more government officials will break their silence and the possibility of a major announcement looms, it's time for people like me to step forward and let the world know the truth. Extraterrestrial life not only exists, but has been among us for years, shaping the very world we live in from the shadows. And now, with the stories coming out, we may finally be able to face the truth head-on and confront whatever future these beings have in store for us. I had recently come across an intriguing story on the internet, suggesting that the geological feature in the Sahara Desert known as the Eye of the Sahara might actually be the legendary kingdom of Atlantis. Now, at first, I couldn't help but be skeptical. After all, Plato described Atlantis as a massive island, as large as Libya and Asia Minor combined, and situated beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. Despite my initial doubts, though, I decided to investigate further and see if this theory matched up with the descriptions of Atlantis in the Critias and the Timaeus. Now, the Eye of Sahara, also known as the Rakat structure, is a striking circular feature located in the Sahara Desert of Mauritania. With a diameter of around 45 kilometers, it forms a very noticeable bullseye amid the otherwise barren expanse of the desert. Now, what's interesting is that you can't see the entire structure while standing on the ground. And it wasn't until NASA began sending people to space that the overall shape of the Eye of the Sahara could even be seen. I mean, shuttle crews used it as a landmark, and the first few photographs of the formation were taken by Gemini mission astronauts in the 1960s. It was only with the help of Landsat satellite images that we were even able to obtain accurate details about its height, size, and its true extent. Even in the 30s and 40s, when the Eye of the Sahara was first discovered, many believed it to be an impact crater. They called it the Rakat crater, a scar left behind by an ancient meteorite. But it wasn't until I looked further into the subsequent studies that I realized the truth was far more fascinating. As I delved into the research, I found that there was actually no evidence of impact proxies. Now, this meant that the feature had to be the result of terrestrial processes rather than an extraterrestrial impact. The leading theory, endorsed by geologists, you'll hear, and they pointed the Eye of the Sahara as a highly eroded geological dome, so to speak. In simpler terms, the formation had been sculpted by nothing more than the hand of time and forces of nature, or so they say. With this new understanding, I learned that an ancient alkaline igneous intrusion dating back to the Cretaceous age shifted the sedimentary rocks above it and created a dome-shaped structure. Now, over time, the relentless forces of erosion wore away the alternating layers of hard and soft rock, then creating the circular pattern of ridges and valleys that we now recognize as the Eye of the Sahara. I decided to dig deeper and approached a fascinating journal paper back from 2021 for precise data on its dimensions. Now, from what I gathered, field mapping and aeromagnetic data had exposed two concentric ring dikes around the central dome, formed by sedimentary and igneous rock. The central dome alone boasts a remarkable surface area of about 4 square kilometers, with a rough topography and vertical structures reaching as high as 40 meters. I discovered that the inner ring dike, which is approximately 3 kilometers from the center, has an impressive thickness of about 30 meters, give or take. Meanwhile, the outer Gabroic ring dike is situated 8 kilometers from the center of the structure and boasts a substantial thickness of about 70 meters. Now, as I continued to gather more information, I couldn't help but appreciate the complexity of this thing. I mean, we're talking about something carved over millions of years by the forces at work on the Earth's surface. And so now that I had built a comprehensive picture of the astounding geological feature, it was time to revisit the whole theory that the Eye of the Sahara is actually the lost city of the Atlantis. To my knowledge, the idea was actually first proposed by Martin K. Eddington in his book The Real Atlantis in the Eye of the Sahara, published back in 2018. But I couldn't be sure whether someone had endorsed this notion earlier. For further insight, I actually stumbled upon a YouTube video from 2023, this year, posted on the Bright Insight channel, detailing additional arguments in support of this hypothesis. Considering the available information and perspectives, I realized it was time for me to scrutinize the evidence and truly evaluate whether it could truly substantiate the Eye of the Sahara as the long-lost city of Atlantis. While the Rakat structure's concentric rings immediately caught my attention with their uncanny resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis, I also acknowledge that the specificity of his tale might not corroborate with every aspect of the Rakat structure. Notably, the difference in size between the central island of Atlantis and the Rakat's central dome is significant. With a diameter of 5 stadia, or approximately 900 meters, the central island's estimated area is about 0.63 square kilometers. which is 6 times smaller than the central dome of the Rikat structure, which has an area of, again, 4 square kilometers. Now, despite this discrepancy in size, I couldn't ignore the fact that both areas did share a comparable magnitude. Furthermore, the intriguing design of Atlantis, with its 2 zones of land surrounded by 3 zones of water, was said to have been crafted by the god Poseidon, who encircled the dwelling of his mortal wife, Cleito. Now, the question remained, could the Rikat structure truly house the grand palace, temples, statues, fountains, baths, gardens, and other various structures that were once part of the central island of Atlantis? I mean, if one were to imagine the ancient kingdom with its complex city layout, advanced engineering technologies, and spectacular architecture, the possibility of the Rikat structure being Atlantis could seem unlikely at first glance. However, I couldn't shake the thought that this geological phenomenon might have, at the very least, inspired the descriptions in Plato's accounts. Now, moreover, Earth's history, replete with volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, and countless other natural disasters, could have erased many traces of a once great civilization residing near the Rikat structure. Indeed, much like the Eye of the Sahara itself, the city could have been buried in time, leaving only faint echoes of a legendary world waiting to be rediscovered someday. Now, in conclusion, while the Eye of the Sahara appears to be extraordinary in many facets, I feel like there's ample evidence preventing us from linking the two. That doesn't mean that the structure is still a complete marvel. I would love to know your thoughts and opinions, and if you decide to read this, what your audience thinks as well.